There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that only reveal their colossal weight in retrospect. They are the hairline fractures in the bedrock of your reality, the subtle shift in atmospheric pressure just before the storm. For me, that moment was not an event, but a stillness. It was the quiet space between two breaths in the pre-dawn dark of my bedroom, with Julian's arm thrown across my chest and the solid, unthinking weight of him pressed against my side. It was the absolute, profound silence where a universe of unspoken things had finally, terrifyingly, come to rest. We had crossed a threshold the night before, not by stepping through a doorway, but by simply choosing not to move away. And now, in the pale, apologetic light of morning, the geography of my small apartment, of my entire life, had been irrevocably redrawn. I lay there, a cartographer of my own undoing, mapping the new and treacherous landscape of a friendship that had, in one long, silent night, become something else entirely. I had known Julian for 8 years, a span of time that felt both impossibly long and fleetingly brief. We met in college, two disparate elements forced into proximity by the arbitrary lottery of freshman dorm assignments. I was on the swim team, a creature of quiet discipline and solitary focus, my world delineated by the black lines at the bottom of a pool. My life was a series of controlled inhalations and explosive exhales, of early mornings that tasted of chlorine and exhaustion. I found my peace in the rhythmic isolation of the water, a place where the clamor of the world was muted to a low, distant hum. I was, by nature and by training, an observer. I watched light fall across surfaces, studied the subtle mechanics of a person's smile, and cataloged the infinitesimal shifts in tone that betrayed a feeling words were trying to hide. I was training to be a photographer, though I didn't know it then. I was simply learning to see. Julian was the opposite of my quietude. He was a software engineer even then, a builder of worlds from lines of code, but his energy was anything but digital. He was loud and kinetic, a supernova of easy laughter and restless motion contained within the lanky frame of a distance runner. He was on the track team, and his life was measured not in the silent glide through water, but in the percussive, earth-shaking rhythm of feet pounding against pavement. He filled every room he entered, not with arrogance, but with an unself-conscious vitality that drew people into his orbit like planets around a sun. He collected friends with the same effortless grace that he collected miles on his morning runs. And somehow, against all logic, he collected me. Our friendship was forged in the crucible of late-night study sessions, shared pizzas, and the mutual misery of 8 a.m. lectures. He would burst into my perpetually tidy room, trailing the scent of rain and exertion, and collapse onto my spare chair, launching into a frantic monologue about a flawed algorithm or a disastrous practice run. I, in turn, would listen, offering quiet counterpoints and a steady, calming presence that seemed to anchor his frantic energy. He saw my silence not as emptiness, but as a space he could safely fill. I saw his energy not as chaos, but as a vibrant, life-affirming force that pulled me out of my own carefully constructed shell. We were a study in contrasts, the anchor and the sail, and we fit together with the strange, perfect logic of puzzle pieces cut from the same unlikely whole. My feelings for him developed the way a photograph does in a darkroom tray, slowly emerging from the chemical wash of proximity and time. It was not a sudden lightning strike, but a gradual, creeping dawn. At first, it was just an awareness, a heightened sensitivity to his presence. I noticed the way his eyes, a startling shade of hazel, would crinkle at the corners when he truly laughed. I learned the specific cadence of his footsteps in the hallway. I could differentiate his moods by the set of his shoulders or the way he ran a hand through his perpetually messy brown hair. These were just data points at first, observations cataloged with the dispassionate eye of a friend. But slowly, imperceptibly, the data began to form a picture, and the picture was one of yearning. It was a quiet, hopeless kind of love, the kind that thrives in the shadows of a friendship too precious to risk. I packed it away, stored it in the dark, unvisited corners of my heart, and built walls around it made of plausible deniability and practiced nonchalance. He dated, of course. He fell in and out of love with a series of bright, cheerful women who seemed to be reflections of his own sunny disposition. I played my part, the supportive best friend, the listening ear, the shoulder to cry on when things inevitably fell apart. Each time, I felt a guilty, shameful flicker of hope, followed by the crushing weight of my own duplicity. I was his constant, his rock, the one person who was always just there. The irony was that the very stability I offered him was built on the foundation of a secret that could shatter everything. I was living a lie of omission, and the weight of the unsaid words grew heavier with each passing year. I told myself it was enough, that having him in my life as a friend was a gift I had no right to jeopardize. And for 8 years, it was. After college, we ended up in the same city, our lives still intertwined. We had graduated from dorm rooms to cramped apartments, but the dynamic remained. My place, a small one-bedroom I'd meticulously curated into a calm, minimalist sanctuary of soft grays and natural light, became our default neutral ground. It was cleaner, quieter, and closer to the good coffee shop. He would come over after work, shedding the stress of his corporate job at the door like a heavy coat, and we would fall back into the easy rhythm of our friendship. We'd order takeout, watch bad movies, and talk about everything and nothing. He was the one constant in my life, a fixed point in the ever-shifting landscape of my 20s. And my love for him remained the silent, central truth around which my own world revolved. I had accepted it as a permanent part of my internal architecture, a load-bearing wall that could never be moved. The shift, when it came, was not a sudden earthquake, but a slow, grinding tectonic movement. It began with Cassandra. She was his longest relationship, a 2-year affair that everyone, including me, thought was the one. She was an architect, sharp and witty and ambitious. And for a while, she seemed to make him happy in a way that was deeper, more settled. But I saw the cracks long before he admitted they were there. I saw the way his laughter became a little more forced, the way a shadow would pass behind his eyes when he thought no one was looking. He started spending more time at my apartment again, seeking refuge from attention at his own place that he wouldn't name. He spoke of her with a kind of weary frustration, the words circling a core of unhappiness he couldn't yet bring himself to touch. His kinetic energy began to fray at the edges, replaced by a restless, anxious exhaustion. The end, when it came, was brutal and swift. It happened on a Tuesday in October, a day of relentless, miserable rain that mirrored the state of his world. He showed up at my door just after midnight, drenched and hollowed out. He didn't have a coat, and his clothes were soaked through, clinging to his frame. He looked like a refugee, shipwrecked and washed ashore at the only port he knew. He didn't say a word, just stood on my welcome mat, dripping onto the hardwood floor, his face a mask of such profound devastation that it stole the air from my lungs. I pulled him inside, wrapped him in a thick towel, and sat him on the couch. He finally looked at me, his hazel eyes clouded with a pain so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. "She's gone, Leo," he whispered, his voice cracking on my name. "She packed her things. She said I was a ghost, living in my own life." That was the night he first stayed over. Not in the guest sense, with polite offers of blankets and pillows, but in the collapsed, broken sense. I made him tea he didn't drink and sat with him in the quiet dark of my living room as he stared at the wall, occasionally shuddering with silent, ragged breaths. I didn't push him to talk. I just stayed, a silent presence against the storm of his grief. Around 3 in the morning, his exhaustion finally won. He slumped sideways on the sofa, his head lolling against the armrest at an awkward angle. I gently lifted his legs onto the cushions and covered him with a thick wool blanket. I stood there for a long time, watching him sleep. His face, usually so animated, was slack with sorrow, the lines around his eyes etched with a weariness that went bone deep. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls around my heart crumbled to dust. All that was left was a raw, aching need to protect him, to somehow absorb his pain into myself. It was a love so fierce and so tender it felt like a physical wound. He stayed on the couch for 3 nights. On the 4th, I found him standing in the living room, a pillow in his hand, looking towards my bedroom door. He looked embarrassed, almost childlike. "My back is killing me on this thing," he mumbled, gesturing to the sofa. "And it's cold out here. Would it be weird if I—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. 1,000 alarms went off in my head. It was a line, a boundary, a sacred space I had never imagined crossing. My bed was my sanctuary, the one place I was truly alone with my thoughts, with my secret. Letting him in felt like an act of profound and terrifying vulnerability. But one look at his face, at the deep, dark circles under his eyes and the desperate plea for simple human warmth, and I knew I couldn't say no. "It's not weird," I said, my voice sounding much calmer than I felt. "Come on." And so, the ritual began. That first night was an exercise in hyper-awareness. I lay on my side of the queen-sized mattress, rigid as a board, my muscles coiled with tension. I could feel the heat radiating from his body across the few inches of space between us, a tangible presence in the cool air. I could hear every breath he took, every rustle of the sheets as he shifted his weight. It was an exquisite torture. My body hummed with a proximity it had craved for years, while my mind screamed at me to be still, to be normal, to not give anything away. I was a spy in my own bed, a double agent betraying the simple trust of a grieving friend. I barely slept, suspended in a state of anxious, hopeful dread. When morning came, he mumbled a thank you, his eyes averted, and the subject was dropped, left to hang in the air between us like unspoken static. But he didn't go back to the couch. The next night, after another evening of quiet commiseration, he simply walked into my bedroom when it was time for sleep, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He took the side of the bed farther from the door, and I took mine. The tension was still there, a live wire running down the center of the mattress, but it was different, less sharp, more of a low, steady hum. I found myself slowly, carefully, beginning to relax. The sheer physical fact of his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, began to feel less like a threat and more like a comfort. It was a dangerous thought, a slide down a slope I knew I shouldn't be on, but I was too tired to fight it. My own carefully guarded loneliness had been breached, and I found that I didn't have the strength to rebuild the walls. The ritual evolved over the next few weeks. The space between us on the bed began to shrink. It wasn't a conscious decision, but an unconscious migration, a slow, gravitational pull in the dark. One night, I woke up to find our shoulders were touching. Another time, my hand brushed against his, and neither of us moved away. We never spoke of it in the morning. Daylight brought with it a return to our established roles, a carefully observed platonic distance. We would make coffee, talk about work, and pretend that we hadn't just spent 8 hours sharing the most intimate of spaces, our bodies separated by mere inches. It was a fragile, unspoken agreement, a shared delusion that allowed this strange new intimacy to continue. I lived in a state of suspended animation, caught between the agonizing hope of the nights and the frustrating reality of the days. I was a photographer of moments, a collector of transient light and shadow, and I began to study him with a new intensity. I watched the way the morning sun would catch the stray hairs at his temple, turning them to gold. I memorized the map of freckles across his shoulders. I learned that he mumbled in his sleep, incoherent fragments of code and half-formed questions. I was documenting the slow erosion of the boundaries between us, capturing these details in my mind like negatives waiting to be developed. I knew I was playing with fire, that I was allowing myself to hope for something that was likely impossible. Julian was grieving. He was lonely. He was seeking comfort. I was a warm body, a safe harbor in a storm. To him, this was probably just a temporary arrangement, a life raft. To me, it was everything. The plausible deniability of it all was the most difficult part. He was my best friend. He was heartbroken. He needed a place to stay. Friends helped friends. On the surface, every action had a logical, platonic explanation. But I could feel the subtext, the undercurrent of something deeper running beneath the surface of our interactions. It was there in the way he started to look at me, a lingering gaze that held a question he didn't seem to know how to ask. It was there in the way he'd find excuses to touch me during the day, a hand on my shoulder, a playful nudge, small gestures that felt charged with a new significance. Or maybe I was just projecting my own desperate longing onto him, seeing what I wanted to see, developing a picture from a blank negative. The uncertainty was a constant, low-grade ache in my chest. One Saturday, about a month into this new arrangement, we spent the day in comfortable silence. I was editing photos in my office nook, and he was on the couch, laptop open but screen dark, just staring out the window at the autumn leaves skittering across the pavement. The quiet in the apartment wasn't empty. It was full, a shared space of peaceful coexistence. That evening, we ordered a pizza and put on a movie we'd both seen a dozen times. He sat closer to me on the sofa than usual, our thighs pressed together. I was acutely aware of every point of contact, the warmth of his leg against mine a brand on my skin. Halfway through the film, he shifted, turning towards me and resting his head on my shoulder. His hair was soft against my neck, and I could feel the gentle puff of his breath against my collarbone. My heart hammered against my ribs. My entire body went still. This was new territory. This was a conscious choice, an undeniable gesture that couldn't be explained away by the pull of gravity in a bed. I sat there, rigid, for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. This is just comfort, one part of my brain insisted. He's still hurting. Don't read into it. Don't ruin this. But another voice, a quieter, more hopeful one, whispered, "This is different. Feel it." He chose this. I slowly, cautiously, relaxed my body, letting myself accept the weight of him. I rested my head against his, my cheek brushing against his hair. A soft sigh escaped his lips, a sound of pure contentment, and he seemed to sink even further into me. We stayed like that for the rest of the movie, two friends on a couch, an invisible line having been crossed in the flickering blue light of the television screen. That night, in bed, the change was palpable. The invisible barrier that had always existed between us, however thin, was gone. He rolled onto his side to face me, the dim light from the street lamp outside, casting his face in soft shadows. He just looked at me, his gaze steady and searching. I met his eyes, my breath caught in my throat. The air was thick with all the things we weren't saying, a conversation happening in the charged space between us. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the vulnerability, but there was something else there too, something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of the same yearning that lived inside of me. He lifted a hand, his movements slow, hesitant, as if he were afraid of startling me. He gently brushed a strand of hair off my forehead. His fingers were warm against my skin, and the simple, fleeting touch sent a jolt through my entire system. It was a gesture of such profound tenderness that it almost broke me. It was not the touch of a friend seeking comfort. It was something more deliberate, more intimate. He let his hand fall, but he didn't move away. He just kept looking at me, his expression unreadable but intense. And then he closed his eyes and shifted closer, until his forehead was resting against mine. We lay there like that, breathing the same air, our bodies not quite touching but connected by the heat between us and the press of our skin, forehead to forehead. I closed my eyes, too, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't just hope, but a fragile, terrifying belief. A belief that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one in this room who was in love. The weeks that followed were a strange and beautiful dance of escalating intimacy. The couch cuddles became a regular occurrence, his head finding its way to my shoulder as if by instinct whenever we sat down to watch something. The space in the bed disappeared completely. We started sleeping tangled together, a comfortable jumble of limbs. Sometimes I'd wake up with his arms slung over my waist, his face buried in my neck. Other times, I'd be the one holding him, my hand resting on the steady rise and fall of his chest. It was a language of touch we were inventing as we went along, a dialect spoken only in the dark. During the day, we remained friends, the performance of platonic normalcy becoming more and more strained, a thin veneer over the undeniable truth of our nights. We were living two lives in one apartment, the life of roommates and the life of something else, something nameless and fragile and overwhelmingly precious. I knew it couldn't last. This liminal space, this beautiful, agonizing ambiguity, was not sustainable. It was a bubble, and bubbles, by their very nature, are destined to pop. I was terrified of what would happen when it did. Would it all evaporate, leaving me with nothing but the memory of a warmth I could no longer have? Or would it solidify into something real, something I could hold on to in the light of day? I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the moment of truth, the pinprick that would decide my fate. I was living inside one of my own photographs, a moment held in perfect, precarious balance, just before the shutter clicks and the image is fixed forever. I wanted to stay in that moment, in the beautiful tension of the almost, but I knew I couldn't. Something had to give. The breaking point arrived on a quiet Thursday night. A storm was raging outside, the wind howling and the rain lashing against the windows. It felt fitting, as if the weather was mirroring the turbulence inside of me. We had just finished dinner, and the apartment was filled with a comfortable warmth that stood in stark contrast to the chaos outdoors. Julian was quieter than usual, a pensive, thoughtful expression on his face. He'd been like that for a few days, more withdrawn, lost in his own head. The easy physical affection had lessened, and an invisible wall seemed to be slowly rising between us again. My anxiety, which had been lulled into a semi-dormant state by our recent closeness, came roaring back to life. I felt him pulling away, and the fear of losing what we almost had, was a cold knot in my stomach. We went to bed early, the sound of the storm a constant roar outside. The tension from the evening followed us into the bedroom. He lay on his side of the bed, his back to me, for the first time in weeks. The space between us felt like a chasm, a cold and empty canyon. I lay there, staring at the rigid line of his spine, my heart aching with a familiar, hopeless pain. This is it, I thought. It's over. He's realized what's happening, and he's pulling back. The experiment is finished. I felt a profound sense of loss, a grief for something that had never even truly been mine. I closed my eyes, trying to force back the burn of tears, trying to accept the inevitable return to the status quo. After what felt like an hour of agonizing silence, broken only by the storm, he spoke, his voice quiet and strained. "Leo," my heart leaped into my throat. "Yeah," I managed to say, my own voice rough with emotion. He didn't move, didn't turn around. He just lay there, facing the wall. "I can't do this." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. This was it. The pinprick. The bubble was bursting. I braced myself for the rest. I can't keep sleeping here. This is weird. I need to get my own space. We need to go back to being just friends. I waited for the finality, for the polite, soul-crushing end to my secret, beautiful dream. But what he said next was not what I expected. "I can't pretend anymore," he said, his voice thick with a strange mixture of frustration and despair. "I came here because I was broken, and I thought you were just fixing me, being a good friend. But it's not that. And I lie here every night, and I feel like I'm going crazy, because I don't want to move. I don't ever want to leave this bed. And that doesn't make any sense." He finally rolled over, his face a mess of conflict in the dim light. His eyes were shining with unshed tears. "What is this, Leo? What are we doing?" The question hung in the air between us, raw and vulnerable. He wasn't ending it. He was asking me to define it. He was lost, adrift in the same uncharted territory as I was, and he was looking to me for a map. All the fear, all the years of silent longing, all the carefully constructed defenses I had built around my heart, they all fell away in that moment. All that was left was him, his beautiful, confused face, his desperate search for an answer I had been holding inside me for 8 years. My own voice, when I found it, was barely a whisper. "What do you want it to be?" He stared at me, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. He seemed to be wrestling with a universe of thoughts, his expression shifting from confusion to fear to a dawning, terrifying realization. He slowly, tentatively, reached a hand across the space between us, not to touch my hair or my face, but just to lay his palm flat on the mattress, inches from my own hand. It was an offering, a question, and I answered. I moved my hand and covered his, my fingers lacing through his. His skin was warm, his hand trembling slightly. A shudder went through his whole body, a release of some long-held tension. He squeezed my hand, a silent, desperate confirmation. He swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving mine. "Would it be okay?" he whispered, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the rain. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The world stopped. The storm outside, the sound of my own frantic heartbeat, the years of waiting. It all faded away into a single point of focus. Him, his question, the unbelievable, terrifying, beautiful possibility of it. There was no room for analysis, no space for the fear of what came next. There was only this moment, this threshold. And for the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I didn't observe. I acted. "Yes," I breathed. He moved with an agonizing slowness, closing the final inches between us. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His eyes searched mine one last time, as if asking for final permission. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. And then, he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. It was not a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of confession. It was hesitant and soft, a question and an answer all at once. It was the taste of salt from his tears and the impossible warmth of his mouth. It was 8 years of unspoken words, of friendship and longing and fear, all collapsing into a single, perfect point of contact. It was the sound of a lock turning, of a door creaking open into a room I never thought I'd be allowed to enter. I kissed him back with all the pent-up tenderness I had stored away for him, all the quiet love I had nurtured in the dark. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. When we finally pulled away, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine again, our hands still clasped tightly between us. The storm still raged outside, but inside my little room, inside the small, sacred space we had created, there was a profound and perfect calm. The aftermath was not the seamless transition into bliss that I might have foolishly dreamed of. The morning after the kiss, after a night spent in a state of quiet, revelatory closeness, a new kind of tension filled the apartment. It was the awkward, fragile tension of the morning after a confession, where the night's vulnerability feels raw and overexposed in the harsh light of day. Julian was quiet, his movements stiff and uncertain. He avoided my eyes, busying himself with the coffee maker as if it were the most complex piece of machinery he had ever encountered. The easy intimacy of the past month was gone, replaced by a palpable, humming anxiety. He was building walls again, brick by painful brick, right before my eyes. I watched him, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I felt a familiar, cold dread creeping in. I had misinterpreted everything. The kiss had been a mistake, a moment of grief-fueled confusion on his part that he was now deeply regretting. I had let my hope run away with me, and now I was going to pay the price. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, he picked up his mug, still not looking at me. I should probably go," he said, his voice low and strained. "Get some of my own stuff. Give you your space back." Each word was a precise, calculated blow. Give you your space back. He was erasing what we had built, reframing our shared intimacy as an imposition, a favor I had granted him that he was now politely repaying. He was retreating so fast I could almost hear the sound of his footsteps echoing away from me. "Julian," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I had to know. I couldn't let him leave with this gaping, undefined wound between us. "Last night, did you mean it?" He finally looked at me, and his face was a portrait of pure, agonizing conflict. He looked trapped, hunted. "I don't know," he said, and the words were a ragged whisper of defeat. "Leo, I don't know what I'm doing. This isn't me. I date women. I've always dated women. My whole life is, it's not this. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure distress. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. I've messed everything up. He grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door and was gone before I could say another word. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent apartment. I stood there in the kitchen, my coffee growing cold in my hands, feeling the phantom warmth of his body from the night before fading into a chilling emptiness. He hadn't just left my apartment. He had fled from the possibility of us, from a truth he wasn't ready to face. And he had taken my fragile, newly born hope with him. The beautiful, honest silence we had created together had been shattered, replaced by the ringing, hollow silence of abandonment. The next 2 weeks were some of the longest of my life. He didn't come back. He sent a single, terse text message the next day. Sorry, just need some time to clear my head. I replied with a simple I'm here if you need to talk, and then, nothing. The silence from his end was absolute. My apartment, which had for the past month been a sanctuary of shared warmth, felt cavernous and cold. Every corner of it held a ghost of him. I saw him on the couch, his head on my shoulder. I felt the dip in the mattress where he used to sleep. The scent of his shampoo lingered in the bathroom. It was a constant, painful reminder of what I had lost, or perhaps, what I had never truly had in the first place. My old companion, loneliness, returned with a vengeance. I had grown so accustomed to his presence, to the easy rhythm of our shared life, that his absence was a physical ache. I tried to focus on my work, losing myself for hours in the darkroom, watching images emerge from nothing. It was usually a meditative process, but now it felt like a cruel metaphor. I could bring a picture to life, fix it on paper, but I couldn't fix this. I couldn't develop the truth of what had happened between us into something solid and real. It remained a blurry, overexposed negative, a moment of light that had been ruined by a clumsy retreat into darkness. My anger and frustration warred with a deep, bottomless sadness. I was angry at him for his cowardice, for his inability to confront his own feelings. But I was also heartbroken for him, for the confusion and fear he was clearly drowning in. I gave him space. I fought the urge to call, to text, to show up at his apartment and demand the conversation he was denying us. I knew that pushing him would only make him retreat further. He had to find his own way through this. But the waiting was a form of torture. With every passing day, the hope that had ignited so brightly within me dwindled, guttering like a candle in a draft. I began to resign myself to the most painful outcome, that I had not only lost the chance at a future with him, but that I had also broken the most important friendship I had ever had. The risk I had been too afraid to take for 8 years had been taken for me, and the result was the very devastation I had always feared. The confrontation happened, as it had to, on my terms. After 2 weeks of radio silence, I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was hollowing me out. I put on my jacket, walked out of my apartment, and drove to his. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that I couldn't live in this limbo any longer. I needed clarity, even if that clarity was the confirmation of my worst fears. I needed to look him in the eye and hear the truth, whatever it was. He opened the door after my third knock. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes that were deeper than I'd ever seen them. His apartment was a mess, takeout containers and clothes strewn about. It was clear he hadn't been living so much as existing. He looked surprised to see me, and then a wave of guilt and shame washed over his face. He didn't invite me in, just stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. Leo, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, my voice firm. And not in a hallway. Let me in, Julian. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed in defeat and stepped aside. I walked into the living room, the chaos of the space a stark reflection of his mental state. I turned to face him. He wouldn't meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. I deserve more than a text message. I began, my voice quiet but unyielding. I deserve more than 2 weeks of silence. What we had, what happened between us, it deserved more than that. You can be scared, you can be confused. I get that. I really do. But you don't get to ghost me. Not after 8 years. Not after everything. He finally looked up, his eyes swimming with a miserable cocktail of emotions. What do you want me to say, Leo? That I'm not who I thought I was. That my whole life feels like a lie. I lie awake at night and I think about you, about being at your place, and it's the only time I've felt right. In months, maybe years. And it terrifies me. It terrifies me because I don't know what it means. What if it just means you miss me? I said, taking a step closer. What if it just means you care about me? We can leave the labels and the definitions for later. But you have to stop running. From this, for me, my voice cracked. Because it's killing me, Julian. Watching you run. A tear finally escaped and traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. I'm so scared, he whispered. I'm scared of what people will think. My family. Our friends. I'm scared of what this makes me. And most of all, I'm scared of hurting you. More than I already have. The only thing that's hurting me is this, I said, gesturing to the space between us, to the silence and the avoidance. This is what hurts. The not knowing. The pretending. I would rather know that you can't be with me and have you back as my friend than live in this nothingness. It was a lie, of course. I wanted so much more. But in that moment, I knew it was what he needed to hear. He needed to know that the foundation of our friendship was still there, that he hadn't completely destroyed it. He took a shuddering breath and closed the remaining distance between us. He didn't kiss me. He just wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my shoulder, and held on tight. He felt thin in my arms, worn down by his own internal war. I held him back, my own anger and hurt melting away, replaced by that same, overwhelming wave of protective tenderness I had felt all those weeks ago when he first showed up at my door. He was still my Julian. Still lost, still struggling. I'm sorry, he mumbled into my shirt. I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I miss you. God, I miss you. I'm right here, I whispered back, my hand stroking his hair. I'm not going anywhere. We stood there for a long time, holding each other in the middle of his messy living room. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. It was a truce. The walls he had been so frantically trying to rebuild had finally come down, and in their place, we were left with the raw, messy, complicated truth of our feelings for each other. The fear was still there, a tangible presence in the room, but for the first time, it felt like we were facing it together. The resolution was not a sudden, cinematic revelation. It was a slow, quiet process of rebuilding. Julian didn't move back in immediately. Instead, we started over. We went on dates. Awkward, fumbling, first dates, as if we were strangers learning each other for the first time, which, in a way, we were. We were learning this new version of us. We walked through parks. We got coffee. We talked for hours. We talked about his fears, about my years of silence, about what a future together might look like. It was painstaking work, the careful excavation of a buried truth. We were two architects drawing up new blueprints for a life we hadn't known we were building. He was still scared, still grappling with the seismic shift in his identity. But he stopped running. He chose to stay, to face the confusion head-on, with me by his side. There were moments of doubt, steps backward, but they were always followed by a renewed commitment, a conscious choice to move forward, together. The biggest change was the honesty. The subtext that had governed our lives for so long was finally gone, replaced by a startling, beautiful clarity. He would tell me when he was feeling overwhelmed. I would tell him when I needed reassurance. We learned to speak the language that had previously only existed in touches and glances in the dark. About a month after our confrontation, he showed up at my door with a duffel bag and a sheepish grin. "Is the other side of the bed still taken?" he asked. My heart did a slow, happy flip in my chest. "It's been waiting for you," I said. And so, the ritual began again, but this time it was different. There was no pretense, no plausible deniability. There was no invisible line down the middle of the mattress. We curled up together with the easy, unconscious intimacy of two people who belonged to each other. The bed was no longer a space of agonizing tension and unspoken hope. It was simply our space. A sanctuary. A home. His presence beside me in the dark was no longer a question, but a quiet, comforting answer. We learned to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. The quiet that had once been filled with my secret longing was now filled with a shared, peaceful certainty. We found our new normal not in grand romantic gestures, but in the small, mundane acts of domesticity. In making coffee for each other in the morning. In the comfortable silence of reading side by side on the couch. In the simple, profound act of falling asleep in each other's arms and waking up to find the other one still there. There are moments in your life that you return to again and again, like a favorite photograph. You study them, turning them over in your mind, examining the light and shadow, trying to pinpoint the exact second that everything changed. For me, it will always be that first morning, lying awake in the pre-dawn dark, the weight of his arm across my chest, terrified and hopeful in the stillness. I didn't know it then, but I was at the beginning of a long, slow development process. The image was still latent, the future unwritten. But the light had found the film. The exposure had been made. All that was left was the patient, terrifying, and ultimately beautiful process of watching it all come into focus. We had found our way out of the gray ambiguity and into the clear, warm light of day. And we had done it together.